Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is the Mount of Olives. Are we missing something big? I was at the garage today having some work done to my van, and I just so happened to have a copy of What Happened in AD 70 on my phone. And I thought to myself, well, now would be a good time to finish up this book because I had been working on it. And the section that I read today had a portion that was about the Mount of Olives. And so let's specifically read what Zechariah 14 verses 3 to 5 says about the Mount of Olives. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle. On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward and the other half southward. And you shall flee to the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach to Azel. And you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. As I was reading it, I started thinking about all of the comments that I received saying to me, how can Jesus possibly have returned in 70 AD? The Mount of Olives has not been split. And, I have thought about that before. And, if you look at the Mount of Olives, it would be really hard, in my opinion, to see if it's actually split because it has been so built out. And, over time, things start to erode, land shifts. You just don't really know what you're looking at. In fact, if you go to visit Jerusalem, I've been told that the tour guides will tell you that the actual streets that Jesus walked on in his days are actually 3 feet below the Jerusalem of today. So there definitely has been some shifting. So I've thought to myself, well, would it be difficult to see because of, again, all of the built out structures, all of the churches, or not churches, all of the holy sites, all of the cemeteries, all of the buildings. And I've been wondering though, could it be to cover something up? But I actually had an even bigger question. As I looked at Zechariah 14 and saw that this was being split so that they could leave Jerusalem, they could flee Jerusalem. And it actually, if you think of Matthew 24:16, it says there, and Jesus said to them, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And he was talking about when you see these things happening, you need to leave. It was an exodus from Jerusalem. What happened in the exodus from Egypt? God parted the sea for the Israelites to cross through that, and then it came back down over top of the Egyptians as they were chasing the Israelites. And I thought to myself, the book of Revelation is very often compared to the book of Exodus, and it is actually called the second Exodus, or I've heard it called the greater Exodus. And how many more things could they have in common? Could the one thing that we are overlooking, we're always looking at these pictures of the temple of the Mount of Olives. We're always looking for evidence of just this big gap or this huge valley. And could it actually have been more like the Red Sea? What happened to the Red Sea when the Israelites got through? It closed back up again. The water went back in. It went all over the Egyptians. So my question is, and this is just speculation, could this valley that was created, that was spoken of in Zechariah 14, have actually closed up in the same manner? So instead of looking for what I would expect to be, very obvious evidence of the Mount of Olives splitting, if you're thinking of it in terms like that, should we be looking for something that would actually be more obscure if it did in fact close back up again? And could all of the structures that they have on the Mount of Olives be to hide that evidence? So after I pondered this morning, when I got home, the first thing that I did was I decided to talk to Donita and another friend, Emmy, from the Manor Manor, and I wanted to ask what their thoughts were on the idea that instead of us looking for some giant rift in the Mount of Olives, could it be that it had already been closed back up again, just as the sea, went back to the way that it originally was? And I can always count on Donita to do deep dives. And she did a video on this because she actually went on Google Earth and she started looking at an aerial view of the Mount of Olives, and she gave me permission to use portions of this video. And I just want to show you what she found there.
We have the Mount of Olives, and I'm trying to kind of get an aerial view, but this is crazy hard to do because when you look at the Mount of Olives here, this is as close as you can get, and it's pointing this particular spot right here as the Mount of Olives. But then you have the Chapel of the Ascension over here, which it could have been there before that. I have no idea, right? Or it could have been something that was built after. I don't know. Is the Mount of Olives just this little hill right here? They've got the street named Mount of Olives. Sounds like they're starting again. I might not get this done in time. If you hear a bunch of clinking, clanking, and whatnot in the background, it is my new roof getting, well, the old one being ripped off and new one being put on. And I'm excited because the majority of our shingles, if you didn't know, this.
So what she's been showing so far is this aerial view of the Mount of Olives really demonstrates, first of all, just how built out this area is. And, I think that it also demonstrates that whenever I would imagine the Mount of Olives, I imagined this very large, prominent mountain. But that's not what you see when you actually look at the Mount of Olives. So let's head back to see what else she has to say, what she found.
Let's go an east-west look here. And then let's tilt, and we're going to be looking at the Dome of the Rock and the Western Wall. So, this right here is kind of where it should have been split, going across here to the north and to the south. And does it look like it could have been split? I don't know. I don't want to steal any thunder here from Shelley, because this was her question, her thought process this morning. But I wanted to, in an effort to kind of help here, this is what I'm kind of seeing. And if we're talking the Mount of Olives being this whole bit here, does it look like maybe there could have been a split somewhere in here? There are a lot of buildings and stuff. When you get in here, yeah, that looks really weird.
So yeah, this just, again, it really does make me think, could there be something underneath there? We don't know what is underneath there. It also really shows me that, again, the Mount of Olives, if you actually look at it, to me, it doesn't look like what I always imagined that it would look like. So finding something like that might be a lot harder than what we expected it would be, because the Mount of Olives itself, at least if you look at it from here, is not a very prominent mountain where something would stand out like that. Now, I'm not saying that it wasn't like that in 70 AD, because again, there are earthquakes and the land changes and there's erosion. But I'm just wondering if we've been looking for the wrong thing all this time. Just take another look here, and I will leave a link to this video in the description box in case you want to watch the entire thing.
What do you guys think? Do you think?
Actually, I do want to add, though, I don't know if it's coming up in the part that she's showing you here, but it's interesting that there are places in the Mount of Olives that are named after the Rockefellers, of all people. And we know their history with changing history and just their history of hiding things and altering things. And to see that there are, I think it was 2 places, I could be wrong, that have the name Rockefeller on them. And then the one place is right next to the Museum of Antiquities. And it's just, yeah, you can't get much more comical in a dark way, I guess, than that. But let's just see what else she has to say here.
I think it could have been like pulled apart and put back together. I don't know. That kind of looks like a valley in there. And then they've got all of these buildings and stuff going on. There's a lot going on here. And how many people would have needed to be escaping from the city, you know, going through here? I don't know. It's an interest.
So I just read this in the video that I posted today, but I'm going to read this here too because it is very relevant when it comes to this topic. And this is just a small portion from the book On Time. It says, according to early church father Eusebius, the first century Christians rightfully understood that the tribulation would occur in their generation. Because of Jesus' words, they fled the fortified city of Jerusalem to the remote mountainous town of Peia to save themselves from its destruction. Describing this event, Eusebius wrote, "But the people of the church in Jerusalem had been commanded by a revelation, vouchsafed to approved men there before the war, to leave the city and to dwell in a certain town of Perea called Peia. And when those that believed in Christ had come there from Jerusalem, then as if the royal city of the Jews and the whole land of Judea were entirely destitute of holy men, the judgment of God at length overtook those who had committed such outrages against Christ and his apostles, and totally destroyed that generation of impious men." Epiphanius of Salamis, a church father writing in 377 AD, also described the flight to Peia. After the exodus from Jerusalem, when all the disciples went to live in Peia, because Christ had told them to leave Jerusalem and to go away since it would undergo a siege. Because of this advice, they lived in Perea after having moved to that place, as I said. So it is my understanding that this valley was created to make it easier and safer and quicker for the saints to flee Jerusalem when that time had come, the time that Jesus had spoken of when he said, "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." I was trying to find a map that specifically had the Mount of Olives labeled on it, but I couldn't. Well, there are lots of maps with the Mount of Olives, but I was specifically looking one that had both the Mount of Olives and Peia, and I was not able to find that. But if we just look here, the Mount of Olives would have been here around Jerusalem, and Peia is right here, and it talks about in the land of Perea, so that's here. So this split that would have moved the Mount of Olives, part of it north and part of it southward, it went from east to west. So it would be, I'm just saying somewhere around here. I don't specifically know. But then they would have used that valley then to go through there and then to go through Perea into Peia where they were instructed to go. But again, that just leaves the question. Was it a valley that was split and remains to this day, and we're just unable to see it because of all the builds out there? Or was it like the parting of the Red Sea, when the Red Sea closed back up after the Israelites had gotten through? I'm wondering if after the saints had gotten through this opening in the Mount of Olives, did that then close back up as well? And maybe that's why we're we're not able to see it. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one right here for me. And if you like my work and would like to support my channel, I will leave a link in the description box for that, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.